on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, Chris Bowen and the Climate Council's latest campaign to influence Australian car buyers. We've got the latest US news with the great John Heinderreker. Kinsey Schofield will join me with the day's royal and celebrity news. And Professor Ian Plimer will provide a climate reality check as only he can. And as always, we'll provide you with plenty of lefties losing it, including Sam Smith at Paris Fashion Week. Oh, my. But before I bring in Daniel Wild with tonight's headlines, let's take a moment to enjoy the biting satirical comedy of Pauline Hanson's Please Explain cartoon series. This week, Albo introduces fiancée Jodie to the DOD. Not the Department of Defence, but the Department of Distractions.
Jodie, this is Dave, the director of the DOD. He's the best in the business.
Heard a lot about you, Jodie. Welcome. Let me show you some of our work. Here are some of our little stunts, saying crazy things on Cole and Jackie O, and of course, Albo's new spectacles. Cool little distractions, you know, the media eat them up. But if you want a full day of distractions, sometimes you just gotta go low. And trust me, there's no low we won't stoop to, Jodie. But it's the big campaigns that I'm really proud of, Jodie. Like this one. This little beauty brought us months of distraction.
Yeah, the voice was Dave's idea, actually. Such a good distraction. A perfect waste of time and money.
So it was never really about improving the lives of Aboriginal people?
That's a good question, Jodie, and your answer is right over there.
Whoosha!
What was that for?
Oh, brilliant, Dave. He's always on this bloke.
Anyway, since the referendum has been all bloody boo-hoo, cost of living, housing crisis, the border, immigration, power, fire, crime, tax cuts, broken promises,
Which is why we decided to shake it off. Shake it off.
Taylor Swift?
Our biggest distraction yet. Swiftmania completely absorbed everyone. Who'd want to talk about Albo's errors when they could talk about Swifty's Errors tour? Don't worry about Airbus Albo, just track Tay-Tay's private jet instead.
But Jodie, Swifty's gone, which means now everyone's going to focus on me again. My policies, my blatant disregard for solving the real issues facing our country.
Unless we do something big. So big and distracting, we've never seen anything like it before. We need a weapon, Jodie. A weapon of mass distraction, which is where you come in.
Joining me now is Deputy Executive Director of the IPA, Daniel Wild. Daniel, let's start with Opposition Leader Peter Dutton's plans to unveil the Coalition's signature energy policy ahead of the May budget. This is something we've been talking about on this station for months, and the Australian reports that Peter Dutton's plans include identifying potential sites for small modular nuclear reactors as part of a nuclear-powered future. This will be a crucial part of the economic reforms program ahead of the next election. How do you see this being received by the Australian public?
Well, it's an important development. I think it shows an element of ambition for the future of our country and for our economy. I think they've shown a lot of courage in pushing this debate where our country has not been going down this path when we should have. I hope that this is the start of a broader discussion about our energy system. We need nuclear in there, there's no doubt about that, but we also need to press pause on the rollout of renewables, which are the fundamental cause of the problems that we have. And we must keep the existing coal-fired power stations going and providing the settings within which new stations can be invested in. Nuclear must be a part of the mix, but like I say, I hope this is a broader debate about affordability and reliability, not just cutting emissions.
I can imagine the climate catastrophists being dead set against this, though nuclear does provide a very clear path to net zero without decimating industry, without decimating living standards. What do you think the chief argument is going to be from the green, climate, global warming lobby? Why will they say this is not something that's achievable in Australia when we've seen it work in countries like Sweden, France, many parts of the world?
Well, there's two reasons they'll give. One is that the costs don't stack up in Australia, and that's what the Prime Minister has basically said today. And the second is they'll run a scare campaign about not wanting a nuclear reactor in your backyard. So those will be the two main arguments that they will use. From a cost angle, it doesn't make sense because we have a ban on nuclear power. That's why no one has invested in it in our country so far. And it does, you're quite right, get to that sort of hypocrisy, which is, well, if you're in favour of net zero, and I think that's a contested policy space, but if you are in favour of net zero, there's no rational reason why you should be opposed to nuclear. But the point that I would make is it's important that the coalition focuses not on net zero or emissions, but on reliability and affordability, which is where the Australian people are at the moment.
Now, these economic reforms are going to include tweaks to tax policy as well, as the Liberals try to win back the voters they've lost. They think the swing they achieved in Dunkley is encouraging, and perhaps they can win back those teal seats. There's talk again today about those teal seats coming back to the Libs. Is that really realistic, Daniel?
Well, what Dunkley shows is the opposite. There was analysis today from John Black showing that the exact opposite is the case, that it was low-income families and tradies that swung toward the Liberals. So what is happening is the evolution of the Liberal Party as a working-class party continues. There were apparent, albeit modest, swings from those key groups. These are people that voted no to the voice to Parliament. Our exit poll showed over 70% of blue-collar workers voted no. They're concerned about mass migration and the pressure that's putting on economic and social services. They're concerned about the energy system and the deindustrialisation of our economy. And they're concerned about the woke ideology which is dividing our nation. When they send their children to school, they come back home with very out-of-touch ideas about what our nation is all about. So what Dunkley shows is that the working class are looking for leadership. They are willing to vote for a Peter Dutton-led coalition. And you've also got to remember there are only 6 teal seats to win. Now, the coalition has to win something like 20 seats to form government. So even if you win the 6 teal seats, where are the rest of the seats coming from?
It's interesting what you say about the evolution of the Liberal Party and the coalition as a whole to represent the outer suburbs, to represent the regional areas. It seems that evolution is something that many within the party are in denial about, because they keep harking back to those blue ribbon seats which have demographically shifted, and those younger electorates, also the affluent and more highly educated parts of the electorate, are just not voting for Conservative parties, whether it's here in Australia or UK or the US. So this is a trend that's bigger than Australia.
You're right, 100% right. We saw it in the US in 2016. We saw it in the UK with Brexit. We're seeing it in Europe. The reality is that these inner city blue ribbon seats are a psychological safe space for a lot within the Liberal Party. But what they have to understand is exactly what you've outlined. The demographics have changed. We also have a government in Canberra that is more radical than Whitlam. It's not like this is a moderate centrist leader. We have a very radical government which is against the interests of outer suburban working class Australians, whether it's wage suppression from mass migration or those other issues we've discussed. The timing is right for the Liberal Party to make a move.
Now, Liberal MP for Flinders, Zoe McKenzie, she's kicked up a storm. She posted a picture, a tribute to the Labor candidate who had just won the seat, writing, "Congratulations, Jodie Bellier. You have been a good friend to women across the Mornington Peninsula. Look forward to working with you in looking after Paradise." A senior Liberal source told The Australian to say the anger among the rank and file is palpable will be an understatement. We are at war with Labor. To think this new breed of Liberal thinks otherwise is infuriating. That's an interesting assessment there. Is that harsh? What's your take on this story?
Well, I tend to have more of a charitable take that perhaps it was naive. I'm not sure there was any sort of malice or anything.
Can you imagine a Labor candidate or a Labor MP doing that right after an election loss?
I can't, no.
No.
And I think it does get to the point where this is a strength and a weakness of Labor. They're very tribal. So they tend to stick together, which means that, I mean, they've only got a 1-seat majority, but no one's questioning the stability of that majority. If the coalition had a 1-seat majority, there'd be a question every day. So It does get to, I think, what's the strength and a weakness of Labor. But you're right, I don't think we'd see that happening on the left.
No, and I think the Libs could learn something about that party loyalty or discipline, if you prefer to call it. Now, let's move on to the Albanese government's major housing policy. The Help to Buy scheme was always deeply flawed, but new analysis shows just how divorced from reality it is. The most it allows a single person to pay for a property is $655,000. And as the Daily Teller reports today, just 4% of houses purchased in Sydney over the past year would have qualified and were under that amount. It's not the only problem with this scheme, Daniel, but it is a fairly big one.
It is. It's not even a Band-Aid solution. We've got a major housing problem in this country. There's something like 250,000 house shortfall over the coming years at a minimum. And there's two key reasons. We've got the demand, which is being surged. As we've just talked about, the mass migration. The government is committed to 1.6 million more migrants over the next 5 years. That's the equivalent to the entire population of Adelaide, and there's a lack of planning for how that's going to take place. And then on the supply side, we have red tape and taxes and limitations on land release at the state level. So both of these things are butting up against each other. That's why we've got record house prices, and that's why many young Australians now can not only not afford to buy a house, but they can't even rent a house. They're having to stay with their parents for longer, which is a major problem for their economic and social development.
And it seems the left solution is to make it even less attractive for people to invest in real estate. And that we've seen that at the state level with the taxes and the increase in taxes. And now they're talking about removing some of the incentives federally. And that's just going to be disastrous for renters, because if you remove the mum and dad investors from the market, what have you got left?
That's right. We need to have a proper assessment of the entire housing market rather than these piecemeal undertakings at the state and federal level. And like I say, it has to deal with both issues at once. You've got to deal with the migration challenge, and you've also got to deal with the red tape and taxes at a state level in order to get a proper housing supply balance back into the market.
Now, social media site X has updated their abuse and harassment policy, and they've reinstated something that Elon Musk was very proud to remove. They said that they're going to reduce the visibility of posts that purposely use different pronouns to address someone other than what that person uses for themselves, or that use a previous name that someone no longer goes by as part of their transition. Elon Musk is claiming, there was a huge uproar with this, that this was due to some court judgment in Brazil. It's not going to apply elsewhere, and that the court ruling is being appealed. Dan, the backlash to this was quite considerable. Advertisers, including Tim Pool, said they were going to terminate all ad spending on X due to the reinstatement of this gender policy. Was this a misunderstanding, or has Elon taken his eye off the prize, appointed this fairly woke CEO who is kind of taking X back to the old days of Twitter?
I don't know how this is going to end up, but so far Elon has been good on free speech overall. He hasn't been perfect, and there are problems with the Twitter platform from a range of areas, but in terms of social media, it is still the front runner. So
True.
I would be willing to give Elon the benefit of the doubt. I don't know about the internal machinations of the staffing at X, but I do know he cleaned out a whole bunch of these woke bureaucrats out of there when he first got in. So, look, we'll wait and see what happens with the Brazil situation, but I'd be willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, at least for now.
Well, just on a business level, what he did was astonishing, because, yes, he way overpaid for it, but he acknowledges that. He said that was a strategic decision because he did it for free speech. But he sacked 70, 80%. He sacked a huge amount of their workforce, and yet the site works fine. In fact, traffic has increased. Everyone was predicting that it was going to die any minute after these sackings, and that just hasn't eventuated. Now let's go to the UK, and a British MP who's just been elected to Parliament in the Rochdale by-election has made his anti-Semitism very clear. Some of these speeches that I've heard this new MP make are astonishing. Have a look at this one.
We have declared Bradford an Israel-free zone. We don't want any Israeli goods. We don't want any Israeli services. We don't want any Israeli academics coming to the university or the college. We don't even want any Israeli tourists to come to Bradford, even if any of them had thought of doing so. We reject this illegal, barbarous, savage state that calls itself Israel. And you have to do the same.
Just shocking. And it seemed Palestine was the major issue in this election. It is an electorate that has got a large Pakistani population, but to hear someone who's going to be sitting in Parliament speak like that, saying there's no Israeli companies, artists, products, they're not welcome here. It's shocking.
Well, we're going to have a real test of British democracy if he says something like that in Parliament. What will be the response? And I think what we're now seeing the UK is really the tip of the spear, I think, for this kind of behaviour. What we're seeing is the boundaries of multiculturalism are being tested in the Western world. It's always been known that one of the challenges to an open society is you will inevitably have people in your society who are intolerant or who have different views, and that can be withstood to a certain point. But now when they're actually in public life in Parliament, I think that shows how rapid the changing composition of the UK society has been, and the fact that I'm sure that the vast majority of migrants do the right thing, but we seem to have an increasing minority that do not subscribe to the basic values of the Western world, and that is deeply concerning.
Well, the word assimilation has become a dirty word. It's not something that's desirable in the eyes of many, when I would think it would be absolutely critical to having migrants embrace their new country. Just before you go, I want to ask you about SBS. They're under fire by members of the Australian Jewish community because of their partnership with Al Jazeera. We've seen some of Al Jazeera's reporting just be virulently anti-Israel, you might argue anti-Semitic. What do you think of that relationship, given that SBS is partly funded by the taxpayer?
Well, I think SBS have said they're going to review the arrangement, or they're looking into it, so that's a positive sign. I think the Jewish community has every right to be concerned. We've seen overall some very biased reporting when it comes to the conflict. Our public broadcasters, including the SBS, have an obligation, a special obligation, I think, to be impartial and balanced, given they receive taxpayer funds. But it gets to this point where you have an increasing growth of journalists that go to university, they're taught a particular worldview around identity politics, and then that influences the way they interpret events. So we often don't receive the news anymore. We receive the news filtered through an ideological lens, and I think this is an outgrowth of that problem.
Absolutely. Daniel Wild, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Joining me now is renowned geologist and author of Green Murder and the Little Green Book, Professor Ian Plimer. Professor, you've been going viral again on X and elsewhere for this speech you gave at the Christopher Dawson Centre for Cultural Studies.
So if people say, oh, the planet's warming, well, it's all about when you start the measurements. If we look at the last 38 years, there has been no change in temperature. If we look in the last 150 years, we've had 3 warming periods and 3 cooling periods with a total warmth of about 0.6 degrees Celsius. Now, I wonder why it warms. I mean, 1850, what happened then? Oh, yes, that was the end of the Little Ice Age. Do you think it's going to warm or cool after a Little Ice Age? Of course it's going to warm. So if you start taking measurements from 1850 in the Industrial Revolution, we have been warming. If you take measurements from the medieval warming, we've been cooling.
And in that chart, you showed different periods of cooling and warming, including the Little Ice Age, Roman warming. What do you say to those climate activists who say planet's overheating and it is catastrophic? It's going to have devastating consequences.
I'd say increase your medication. These people are exaggerating, and they can do it because they don't know any history. They don't know any science. They don't know the past. And if they looked at the past, it might alarm them to know that we've actually been cooling for 50 million years. We started an ice age 34 million years ago, and we had Northern Hemisphere ice start 2.5 million years ago. And since then, we've been having cycles of ice and cycles of very little ice. This is glaciation and interglacial. Now, we've had these very well documented for more than 100 years. Why don't they read history?
So that's your point. When people say the planet's warming, your answer is, well, from when? Are you talking about from 30 years ago or 100 years ago or 2,000 years ago?
Well, I'm saying use some facts. Forget the emotion.
Okay.
Let's look at facts. It's all written down. It's in history, it's in anthropology, it's in archaeology, it's in geology.
The different temperatures in these different cooling and warming periods aren't in question. That's something that's established fact.
It's well established. It's been published for a long period of time.
So how much cooler is it right now compared to, say, the Roman warming periods? Which I
about 5 degrees Celsius cooler, and sea level's gone down a little bit.
How long ago was that? It was 2,500 years ago.
Roman times was 2,000 years ago.
2,000 years ago.
So we've cooled since Roman times. We've warmed since the Viking times. We've cooled since the medieval times. We've warmed since the Middle Ages. So if you're going to say the planet's warming, since when?
Now, Energy Minister Chris Bowen is not giving up on his dream to make us all switch to electric vehicles. He is also promoting this video on X from the Climate Council featuring comedian Dave Hughes about the benefits of using more energy efficient cars.
$2 a litre? Petrol prices are out of control. Aussie cars guzzle more fuel than those sold overseas because we don't have national standards that make manufacturers send us their most efficient cars. It's time to say goodbye to crippling petrol bills and get on the road to saving.
Now, what's wrong with that? The video claims only Australia and Russia are among big countries that don't have national standards that require car manufacturers to send them their most fuel-efficient cars. Is that a cause we can all get behind?
Well, I drove a V8 yesterday from Adelaide to Melbourne, and I challenge people to get a more fuel-efficient car. This went 7.1 litres per 100 kilometres for the 750 kilometres. Now, I didn't have to stop and wait for a day for the electric vehicle to charge. Petrol-driven vehicles and diesel-driven vehicles have been a massive change to our society. They have become so efficient that we don't need to go electric. Now, we couldn't go electric in this country. It's a big country. We can't plough paddocks with electric tractors. We can't sow seeds with electric tractors. We can't harvest the crops with electric tractors. We can't process the food without using diesel, and we can't transport the food from rural Australia back into the cities unless we have diesel. This country runs on diesel. So what Mr. Bowen is really trying to say is, my ideology will make you starve. Just suck it up. I'm running this country on ideology. I'm not running it to try to make it a very efficient country. I'm not making it for the benefit of the electorate.
Well, I think we should have a weekly segment where you come in and you just fact-check Chris Bowen. I think that could work.
Well,
educating Chris, we could
you'd have to do that every day, Rita, surely.
Maybe it could be a daily segment.
Chris Bowen is a great minister. He's the greatest minister in the government that the Liberal Party have got because he is going to guarantee that there will be a change of government.
Now, Australia's second largest electricity and gas retailer, AGL Energy, has earmarked a site midway between Sydney and Adelaide to build an energy park full of solar and wind farms that they say is going to provide nearly 20% of the renewable energy it needs to complete its energy transition. And this is not going to surprise many people, given billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes is the company's largest shareholder. What do you make of the investment? We don't know yet how much the total project is going to cost. Do we know if there's going to be any taxpayer funds involved?
Well, the only thing renewable about renewable energy are the subsidies. They just keep coming. People do not build wind turbines and solar energy factories for providing electricity. They do it to be paid by taxpayers. There are massive taxpayer funds go into this. If you build one of these plants between Sydney and Adelaide, I can tell you that's out in the Donga. And you have to put in a new grid. You have to destroy agricultural land. Is that sensible for Australia to destroy food-producing land when we've got plenty of gas, plenty of coal, plenty of uranium and much better ways of doing it? And I can remember the times when power was cheap and power was reliable. Why did we change that?
Well, to save the planet, Ian, of course, to save the planet from catastrophic global warming. Professor Ian Plimer, always a pleasure. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you for having me.
And still to come, the great John Heinderreker joins me with the latest US news, and we'll also have an update on how El Salvador is stripping its schools of radical gender ideology. Plus, everyone's favourite segment, Lefties Losing It. That's after this. Welcome back. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start Lefties with Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA, schooling clueless college kids. He's been doing this for years. Watch here as a smug social justice warrior is forced to confront not only her own ignorance, but perhaps racism, and watch as she desperately tries to find a new argument.
At some point, somebody's truth has to win. Because guess what? Your truth doesn't matter. That's still a truth
You've had
claim.
your truth in this country for the past thousands of decades.
Thousands of decades?
Not thousands. Whatever. That's a little embarrassing.
Yeah.
Like, your truth has been the narrative of this country forever.
Hasn't
and
it?
you think
Roe
yes,
versus Wade just got
truth-
repealed. Abortion was legal in this country for 40 years.
And before the 40 years, what was and crime dropped
Thankfully
40%
illegal in most
after it went.
Oh, wait, hold on. Do you think abortion lowers crime rates?
Crime dropped 40% after abortion became legal.
Why is that the case?
It's called a statistic.
Who has the most abortions in America?
Women.
Black people. Is that so? Are you trying to say the termination of blacks in the womb lower crime? That's a very racist argument.
That is not a racist.
You know, I can't hear you. You got to come up.
There has to be.
Like, yeah, sure. Go ahead. Okay.
Oh, goodness me. Now to an important lesson about actions and consequences.
Hey guys, update. I didn't get the job. I just got the email. I'm guessing my appearance had a lot to do with it.
Let's watch this climate cultist abuse Senator Joe Manchin and then watch as he goes flying.
Joe Manchin, you have sold our futures and you've gotten rich doing it. You sick. How dare you? You have sold our futures. How dare you? You have sold our futures.
Time to go to Paris Fashion Week and check on pop star Sam Smith, who took to the catwalk for Vivienne Westwood. So what is the height of fashion in 2024? Oh dear, but almost as funny as that get-up was the media reports, including from BuzzFeed, who wrote, Sam Smith walked during Paris Fashion Week, and despite what the haters think, they ate everyone up. They, because he identifies as a plural, of course. Now, let's go back to a few years ago when removing healthy body parts was frowned upon. Remember this woman who said to be her authentic self, she had to be blind.
Do you have any regrets about taking your own vision or the process with which you did take your own vision?
I don't have any regrets taking my vision. I believe I should have been born blind, and I'm happy the way I am. I do have some regrets about the way I did it, but in the end, I'm happy the way I am.
Let's see how the doctors on the panel reacted. I wonder how many of them would react like this when a confused 15-year-old girl wants to remove her healthy breasts.
Dr. Phil, with all due respect to Jewel, but I am having a really hard time sitting so close to someone who traumatized herself, who damaged herself. We took an oath in medicine to help people. We see horrible tragedies every single day as doctors, and people who would give anything to go back and restore their vision, their health. My heart is beating out of my chest. I can't even make sense of the emotions I'm feeling, because to hear someone say, I've always felt I should be blind. Well, I've always felt I should be the Queen of England, but I'm not going out to become the Queen of England.
Exactly. Now to Democrat Senator John Fetterman, who went into hospital last year and seems to have emerged as a new man. Here is the junior senator from the great state of Pennsylvania, making anti-Israeli protesters lose it.
Senator, one question. Have you talked to any of the American...
I'm a Palestinian.
I'm going to respect your views. I ask you to respect mine.
That's not a...
It's the people. Okay.
That's an inhumane view.
Being pro-genocide is not a view.
I'm a Palestinian. Why can't you look me in the face?
I'm a military assistant. I'm an intelligence officer. I'm a constituent. I'm an intelligence officer.
Let's end Lefties with a solid analogy. We do love a good analogy on this program. And comic Rob Schneider nailed it with this one about reparations for slavery.
In California, it has gone out of committee to approve slave reparations to be paid to people who were never slaves, to be paid for by people who never owned slaves, in a state that never had slaves. That's like paying child support for a child you never had to a woman you never.
Joining me now is President of the Center of the American Experiment, John Heindeраker. John, you know the Biden administration is in deep trouble when one of its unofficial propaganda arms, CNN, asks the Homeland Security this question.
Is it the policy of the Biden administration to allow as many migrants to come across the border in order to change the political dynamics, the electoral dynamics of America?
Of course not. And the facts indicate that that is absolutely false. Since May of this year, of last year, we have removed or returned more individuals than in any year since 2015.
Well, it's not a shock they deported more people when they've set records every single year of the Biden administration for illegal immigration.
Rita, nobody knows how many people have crossed the southern border since Joe Biden opened it on purpose. Estimates run between 7 million and 10 million, enormous numbers of illegals flooding into the United States, many of them now coming from the Middle East, coming from Africa, coming from China. And it's created a total disaster in the border states, as well as in cities like New York, Chicago, and Denver.
Now, there's increased pressure on President Biden to switch his priorities and look at protecting that US border. We had a college student who was killed by an illegal immigrant in Georgia. Yet President Biden is tweeting things like this. He posted, "Congress must pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act so it can make police reform the law of the land." Vivek Ramaswamy replied to that with, "Here's a better idea. Pass the Laken Riley Secure the Border Act so we can stop draining police resources on illegal aliens with criminal records and start deporting them. Instead, say her name, Mr. President." Now, Laken Riley's family have called her murder an avoidable tragedy. And John, this is a crime that has really had an impact in the US. There was a massive rally. People understand that this illegal immigration, it isn't just something that is affecting those border towns. It is having an impact across the country.
You know, Rita, a lot of people have been murdered by illegal immigrants over the years. But for whatever reason, this murder of Laken Riley by this illegal Venezuelan criminal, and he was a criminal, you know, a kind of a career criminal that wound up committing this murder. This has really galvanized a lot of people in the United States, and people don't like illegal immigration. You know, people don't like the crime. People don't like the threats of terrorism. People don't like the strain that's put on social services, the lack of housing, and so forth. And I think this crime, more than any other, has been kind of a rallying point for people to stand up against illegal immigration and really try to stop it.
Absolutely. And you know what? Hispanic voters don't like illegal immigration. It's something that confuses some in the media, but just because you're a migrant doesn't mean you back illegal immigration. Now let's move on to Republican presidential hopeful Nikki Haley, who's staring down what could be her final battle against Donald Trump on Super Tuesday after a string of defeats, some of them you might call humiliating defeats in Republican primaries. Some commentators, including Michael Goodwin in the New York Post, blame her losses on her complete ignorance of her own party. He wrote, she's out of step with the party she wants to lead. She doesn't seem to like it very much, and its voters have returned the favour. Some described her as appealing to a party that no longer exists. John, it's hard to disagree with that when you look at some of the folk funding her. They're precisely the sort of people the Republican base loads.
Yeah. I've got a news flash for you, Rita. Nikki Haley has just been announced the winner of her first primary, and that is the Washington, D.C. primary. So the one place Nikki Haley was able to win was the swamp. And I mean, that kind of tells you everything that you need to know.
Yep.
The Republican Party has moved. Republican voters have moved. And I think most Republicans now believe that we are in a battle for the survival of our country. And when you see the things that the Democrats are doing nowadays, Republicans want somebody who's not a traditional politician. Republicans want somebody who's going to be a street fighter, who's going to go toe-to-toe with what the Democrats are doing and try to beat them. And most Republicans obviously think that Donald Trump is that candidate.
The Supreme Court will announce at least one decision tomorrow on whether Donald Trump can hold office. New York Times reports the ruling is likely to resolve not only whether Trump will appear on the Colorado primary ballot, but also whether he is eligible to run in the general election. John, tell me about these cases, including the court considering whether Trump is immune from prosecution on charges that he plotted to overturn the results of the 2020 election.
The decision I think we're going to see tomorrow morning is on the 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which the Colorado courts held disqualifies Trump for running for the presidency. It says that if you were formerly an officer of the United States and you engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States, you cannot hold office subsequently. And of course, that was adopted after the Civil War when 600,000 people were killed, over a 4-year period. That was the insurrection and rebellion that the authors of the 14th Amendment were talking about. And that decision has to come out, I think, tomorrow, because Tuesday is Super Tuesday with primaries in 16 states, including Colorado. And so I'm confident that the Supreme Court is going to hold that section does not disqualify Trump from the presidency. We need a national ruling. It's the 14th Amendment. It's a national law. And we can't have him disqualified in one state and qualified in another state. And they're going to hold that he is not disqualified by the 14th Amendment. I hope that they don't do that on a narrow technical ground, which they likely will do. I'd like to see them come out and rule that the protest on January 6th was not an insurrection or rebellion as contemplated by the 14th Amendment. And, there's a federal law that criminalizes using the same language, insurrection or rebellion. And Donald Trump has not been charged, let alone convicted under that statute. And so I'm sure that's how the Supreme Court is going to rule. And I hope they do it, really take the bull by the horns and say this was not an insurrection.
Now, before you go, we've got more good news from El Salvador, with the government there banning all gender ideology content from the nation's public school system. Quite a contrast from what's happening in the US. John, crime is plummeting there and gender ideology too.
Well, I'll give you some good news, Rita. I'm coming to you from the state of Florida, and Florida also has banned teaching this ideology of gender identity. Boys can be girls and girls can be boys, and you make up your mind when you're 8 years old. The state of Florida has banned that nonsense from their public schools. And let's hope this turns into a movement across the United States, because it's badly needed.
John Heinderreker, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And still to come, Meghan Markle goes on a lavish holiday without her husband. But the only thing royal watchers care about is Kate's disappearance. Where is the Princess of Wales? Kinsey Schofield joins me next. You're watching The Rita Panahi Show. Joining me now from the US is Hollywood and royal reporter Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, royal aides have criticised what they call the madness of social media as conspiracy theories about the Princess of Wales' health continue to circulate online. But Kinsey, the question remains, where is Kate? We have not seen her since Christmas Day. And we know very little about why she was hospitalised for 2 weeks in mid-January.
I mean, well, the palace has reacted to the social media commentary, and they've said, we were very clear with you that we are not going to give you regular updates on the Princess of Wales after her abdominal surgery. She's going to be in recovery until Easter, and don't expect to see her then. But I think that this is a reflection of Harry and Meghan oversharing for the last 4. I know people say we blame everything on them, but Rita, stay with me here. I mean, for the last 4 years, we had a book, we had a reality show, we had multiple sit-down interviews. And when Meghan Markle had her miscarriage, she announced it, through was it the New York Times? Like, she wrote an op-ed announcing her miscarriage. And I just think it's warped our expectations when it comes to what we want to hear about the British royal family and what we expect to hear about the British royal family. We didn't know necessarily that Princess Diana was dealing with her ailments when she was not only had mental health problems, but was dealing with bulimia. We found out about it later, but that it's just not, it feels like Harry and Meghan have made it way more okay for us to try to push the envelope and ask for more when it comes to the privacy of the real working royals.
You're 100% right there, but the argument against that is that we're talking about Kate. We're talking about possibly the most popular royal now that the Queen's no longer with us, and the future Queen, and she was so active. She was the number of engagements she did, she was a proper working royal, and to not have seen her since Christmas Day, you can understand why genuine royalists, monarchists I should call them, are a little bit perturbed. They're worried about whether she's okay. I mean, a healthy woman of her age spending 2 weeks in hospital, we don't really know what other than abdominal surgery. You can understand why, in the absence of any information, these conspiracy theories are flying around the social media sites.
I can a little bit, but I also think that some of them are so outrageous that it feels more on the malicious side, like trying to cause trouble more than actual sincere concern. I don't know if you've seen some of them, but some of them are very malicious and nasty. I think that you're right. Catherine is a prominent figure, and she is so beautiful. She looks, every time we see her, she's glowing. But the good news is that the palace has told us as recently as Friday, I believe, that she is doing well. They talked to Page Six and they said, look, we don't want to give you guys regular updates. The only thing we asked for was privacy, but she is doing well. So are we getting details on what it is she's suffering from or where she's at in her rehabilitation? We're not getting that information. But is she okay? The palace says she is.
Now let's move along to Meghan Markle. No mystery around her activities. She shares it all, as she appeared to enjoy a very lavish winter getaway with friends in Utah last week. But there was no signs of Harry, Kinsey. That's okay. You can have a girls' trip.
Well, if it's a day that ends with Y, the chances are pretty high that Prince Harry is fighting somebody in some sort of litigation, if we're being honest. But when it's Meghan, I wonder when is Meghan Markle not on vacation. If you look at the recent IRS tax filing, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle each work just 1 hour a week for Archewell Foundation. Their contract with Spotify was terminated because they were not productive enough. And according to this new article that came out last week, written by The Rep, Archewell Productions is in chaos because their Netflix deal is under pressure, likely again because of productivity. So when is Meghan Markle not on vacation is the real question. But yes, the Suits star was spotted via Instagram with Pilates platinum owner Heather Dorak and co-founder of Alliance of Moms, Kelly McKee. I think it's Zafkin. Is that how you pronounce her name? They're not celebrities, but both women posted the photo with like highly curated captions about their hearts being so full. Very Meghan Markle, language. So there's nothing suspicious about that.
Oh dear. When is she not on vacation is an excellent question. I had no idea they were working only an hour a week. That is outrageous, but
And that's what they told the IRS. They lie about everything else. You're going to tell the IRS that that's the one place I'd expect them to be like, oh no, we spend at least 48 hours a week.
But no, an hour. Maybe they're even overstating that. Queen Camilla has announced she will be taking a break from official duties after leading the monarchy following King Charles's cancer diagnosis. She was doing a lot of the heavy lifting for a period there, and it sounds like the king will be back to duty soon as he announces his intention to visit Australia by the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think that this, we're going to see the Queen on March 11th. She's going to be representing the family for Commonwealth Day. So it's not like the mystery surrounding Catherine, or either, even with Prince William, they were like, he's taking a temporary break and we didn't have a date to look forward to. With this, we know we're going to see her in a few days, realistically. I also expect to see the King in video form on Commonwealth Day, whether he releases that through television or through social media. I think we're going to hear a little bit from him as well. But she's done 13 engagements by herself recently. I'm sure she'd like to spend some time with her husband who's ill and just, have a little peace and quiet.
Now, something entirely different. Let's talk a bit about Kanye West and his wife, Bianca Censori. She stepped out in a surprisingly modest outfit recently, and it's been reported she might actually face legal ramifications for waltzing around Paris pretty much nude. Meanwhile, Kanye is also making a bit of news, sliding into the DMs of some ladies on Instagram, according to the boyfriend of one of those ladies, boxer Bryce Hall. Trying to keep up with this. There's a lot happening. Kinsey, what is your take on this strange union? Is she a victim, Bianca? Is Kanye using her to punish and humiliate his former wife, Kim? There are so many theories about his treatment of his new wife, including a great deal of focus on how she dresses or how little she dresses.
I know Bianca way more than I ever thought I should or would, but thanks to the way she dresses. I've got a lot of intel that I wish I could untell. But I think that I've never seen him be verbally or physically, or I don't know if he's emotionally abusive towards her. But I'm going to admit something to you that I'm ashamed of. I have watched episodes of The Kardashians, and there was one where Kim talked about how Kanye chastised her for the way she dressed. And she was wearing very little. She looked very sexy. And Kanye was critical of her and said, the mother of my children should not be seen this way. And while Bianca hasn't had his children, you would expect him to hold her, up to the same standards. There was also the weird Julia Fox thing, and we are still haunted with Julia Fox every other day. She's in Page 6.
Oh, yes.
and his temporary girlfriend as well. These feel like projects with him. I think that he feels some sort of power in elevating these women and making them become celebrities, and maybe it's his way to hurt his ex-wife. But I don't know. They're a very strange pair. We know very little about their private lives. And I used to champion Kanye, but I've stepped back. I can't, the anti-Semitic stuff is where he lost me.
Well, he's done a 180 on so many things. You mentioned he was very critical of Kim Kardashian dressing so immodestly, but I mean, you know, she's practically a nun compared to what Bianca's getting around in. And there's reports from her family that that's all Kanye is doing. He is dressing her. There's a lot of questions about what's going through his mind. Kinsey Schofield, thank you so much for your time this evening. That's it from me tonight. Don't go anywhere. Up next is Newsnight. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow.